After about 18 hours or so in Starfield, I've come to a conclusion. Starfield is not a space game. Not how I had envisioned it in my head, at least. And that's okay. It's a game that takes place in space. There's a lot of talking about space. You travel through space to get from location to location. But if you boil it down, Starfield really is kind of just Skyrim in space, in the best possible way that it could be. It's a classic Bethesda RPG set in the setting of space, where most of the most interesting parts of the game are going to be the people you meet and the locations that you explore and the problems that you help the people that you've met solve, not necessarily interplanetary exploration like I thought the game might be, which is okay. And I actually like the game quite a bit, and the more that I play, the more I actually warm up to the unique experience that it actually does provide versus the one that I kind of had in the back of my head. Speaking of which, I'm actually going to put at the end of this video a little 2-minute intro that I recorded right before I launched the game, kind of talking about my perspective on space exploration and how generally I find space to be pretty freaking terrifying. Just the idea of gas giant planets and the incredible distances of mostly empty space is just kind of hard for me to wrap my mind around. So I guess maybe I should be grateful then that Starfield is not the rather unsettling deep space exploration game that I thought it was going to be, and instead it's just a more traditional and rather conservative Bethesda RPG with a brand new setting. And I gotta say, I am pretty okay with that. Let's dive in with some Starfield first impressions. As my fans crank up to 1,000, what is going on over there? Did I not close the game? It's closed. Oh, Chrome is open. My 9,000 tabs. Anyway, first impressions, let's dive in. To start things off, I want to address the game's slow beginning, just briefly because everyone has already covered this pretty well in depth, but I'll say that if you've enjoyed any of Bethesda's previous RPG titles, any of the Fallout games, any of the Elder Scrolls games, give Starfield a chance, because if you enjoy their style of gameplay, you are going to enjoy Starfield eventually. It won't take as long for everyone as it did some of the reviewers or some of the people that really just gave up. But yeah, this is definitely, I think, Bethesda's weakest introduction, and I think they're probably doing a lot of meeting around the campfire and trying to figure out what went wrong with the intro. Because on paper it does sound pretty cool. You're a miner, you find this alien artifact, and then this secret organization comes and picks you up. It has all the hallmarks of a classic zero to hero Bethesda RPG intro, but it just falls flat overall. Part of the issue is just how many different systems this game has, and not space systems. I'm referring to the game mechanics. There's things for piloting your ship and controlling the shields and weaponry. There's a lot of learning how the map system works and how fast travel works. There's also getting accustomed to combat depending on how you've spec'd your character out, and the fact that a lot of classic Bethesda combat scenarios are locked behind traits in Starfield. You can't even really do stealth, for example, without selecting the trait once you level up far enough. If you picked the wrong traits or the wrong weapons, or end up using the wrong weapons for your character, the combat can fall flat pretty quickly. And that's a big turnoff right at the start when the game is shoving you into big fights with lots of space pirates right off the bat, trying to make things exciting. By the time you get to the first city, New Atlantis, you've gone through a whole bunch of things and you're trying to remember all these new game systems. And then you arrive in what I think is one of the weakest locations in the game, New Atlantis. It's a large modern capital city, and to be honest, visually, a lot of it does not look great. It's one of the visually weakest locations, I think, in the game that I've seen so far in almost 20 hours. The skyline is fine, but man, the vegetation and lighting, something about it in these levels for New Atlantis just does not look good. Some of the vegetation looks straight out of Fallout 3 at times. And on top of the rather lackluster visuals, you're hit at the same time with a huge slowdown in the pace of the game after an already slow intro. If you decide to try and get your bearings after getting back to New Atlantis for the first time and ending the actual intro missions, and you're trying to explore a bit and meet some people, you're going to be bombarded with small side quests. And again, this is all in a rather unflattering area for the game. I ended up stuck in New Atlantis for a couple of hours trying to do a couple small side quests that were interesting, sort some loot, explore a bit, but man, it was just not grabbing me. I think I almost fell asleep the first night playing. To be fair, it was after a long workday and a long day of living the dad life, but I actually took a screenshot of my character who also looked like he was falling asleep in game because it just cracked me up so much. Once I finally left New Atlantis, I was able to discover more interesting quests at a more reasonable pace, both not ones that were throwing too many new game systems at you, and also ones that weren't dragging things out at terrible locations either. There was a nice middle ground once I started exploring on my own, and that's true of most Bethesda titles, at least how I play them. As I first branched out from that initial starting capital city, I also had to come to grips with space and how it works in Starfield. And once I came to terms with that, that is when the enjoyment of the game really started clicking for me. You see, in Starfield, you do a lot of traveling with the map. And to be fair, the maps are beautiful. They are multi-tiered. You've got galaxy, system, planetary maps. You've got some very ugly surface maps once you get down to that point on the planetary levels. I hope that they patch that soon, but you're going to spend a lot of time in the maps, and that's because space travel takes a long time. When you grav drive to a system and to a planetary location, you're just in a big skybox, basically, a big cinematic skybox. You can fly around for a while, and as some other content creators have discovered, you can actually fly for hours and clip right into the skybox where the planets are just these fake things in the background, but you're not supposed to do that. You're supposed to jump drive to the location, fly around for a bit, fight some pirates if there's some pirates on board, have some hilarious encounters with other ship captains, and just enjoy the sights a bit before you bring up the map and do your landing sequence.
Hell of a view from here.
And I would say, pretty disappointed by that whole system at first, because in my head, I had this idea where I would be flying around manually a lot in space, and that's just not the case. Now, as I'm fast traveling around, I am taking the time to not just jump from a takeoff right to a landing on a new planet where basically it's just a load screen. I try and jump around in space a bit and simulate some space travel, and that's actually a lot of fun for me, where I can skip it if I want to, but a lot of times when I'm traveling to a new system, I do want to do that jump just into the system itself, do some flying around, look for encounters, look for some floating space loot, and enjoy the sights before I go back to the meat and potatoes of what Bethesda games always have to offer, and that's exploring unique locations and meeting unique people. And while this game isn't probably going to win a bunch of awards for its NPC animations, there is some fantastic voice work backing a lot of the characters in this game.
Sometimes I just feel cursed. And I could live with that if it was just me. But Simone and little Liv?
And the writing, as is Bethesda's tradition, is interesting and frequently pretty nuanced too. Some of that nuance isn't seen until later on because, as other reviewers have mentioned, a lot of the people you meet in that intro section of the game are just so obnoxiously nice that there's not a lot of room for nuance, but you're going to run into more interesting characters and scenarios the further you get into the game and the further you branch out from that intro. And I say all that as somebody who plays the nice guy character basically 90% of the time in RPGs. I just can't get away from it. It's almost always where I end up. But even for me, the members of Constellation and the people you meet in the intro of the game are just so obnoxiously nice. They do seem a bit 2D at first, but the more time you spend with them, the more you learn about their backstories. There's some good stuff there. Once I had accepted how the space travel would work in this game, and then also unlocked quite a few different weapon options in my traits, that is when the game really clicked for me, doing the side quest and even just exploring random planets and systems. And I actually appreciate those random encounters. There is still a sense of exploration in Starfield, and once you do have more options in your combat arsenal, it's okay to go to a randomly generated fight if you do have a number of tools in your toolbox to win that fight with. Some of my highlights for exploring were just looking for interesting places on the star map that were on the way to different objectives and stopping along the way to harvest some supplies, check out an abandoned outpost, and one of my personal favorite moments was landing on Earth's moon. There was even some custom voiceover work for my companion based around that, and that was just such a cool moment. For all of the limitations of Starfield's space travel, landing on the moon with some voiceover to go along with it, that really made my day. That was a very, very cool moment. And you can do that basically at any point once you get your ship at the start of the game. There are still a couple of overall low points for the game. The UI is pretty terrible, I think. There's just a lot going on in this game, and the UI tries to be flashy and technical, and at times makes it more difficult to get to what you need to get to. There's also a little bit of Bethesda wonk going on, not nearly as much as previous games, but you'll still have NPCs that will clip through things. And something I noticed in my playthrough is my character's eyes and the eyes of other NPCs frequently just freak out, and their eyes and head are tracking weird stuff and squinting weird and giving you side-eye weird or backwards. It's just, the eyes and facial movements are a little freaky at times. So there's a few rough edges, but this is also Bethesda's most stable launch, I think, by far. I've had one hard crash in 18 hours, and it was actually during an early main quest mission in a very small interior space too. So I don't know what happened there. I just loaded my save and kept on going. The autosave saved me there. No pun intended. But overall, Starfield is incredibly stable and runs pretty okay as well. I did add the DLSS mod to get some extra frames just because the AMD version of their frame resizing was not working great on my 3080 Ti, and DLSS does seem to be doing a bit more for me in the frame rate department. But yeah, at times you're going to see some of my clips here dipping below into the 40s and even the 30s at times, especially in New Atlantis, oddly. I don't know what is going on, just maybe the amount of NPCs and prompts going on. But yeah, New Atlantis not looking great and still also having terrible frame rates. Just not a great first impression for the first city that you land in. All that being said, guys, I'm still less than 20 hours in, and it's going to be a slow burn game for me. Now that I have these first impressions out to you guys, I'm going to be looking at where I want to pick up a RangerDave Explores Space series to do with you guys, if you'd be interested in that. I think I would be as well, but I'm not going to rush this game. There's still entire mechanics in this game, like shipbuilding, that I've barely touched, and it is a massive game. It is terrifyingly massive the more that I get into it. Even though parts of this game are procedural, this game overall is just absolutely massive, and I think I'm just starting to understand how massive it is. So far for me, I think it went from like a 6 out of 10 in the intro to probably a very solid 7.5 right now, and ticking up. I think it's going to be a 8 out of 10 game for me eventually. We'll see how the main story pans out. For now, thank you guys for watching. I'll see you next time. Oh, and don't forget, here's that audio clip that I recorded before I started playing, thinking that this was going to be a completely different kind of game. Describing space as the final frontier was popularized by Star Trek, but years ago I made a much less popular quote, a little bit of a riff on it, where I described space on the Casual Shenanigans Gaming Podcast as, in fact, the final nightmare. I don't know about you guys, but to me, space is equal parts full of wonder and absolutely freaking terrifying. I've always struggled with trying to put the vastness, the emptiness of space into perspective, as well as just the idea of things like gas giant planets like Jupiter, and just how different their makeup is compared to our little planet Earth, and just how absolutely terrifyingly gigantic a gas giant like Jupiter is. I love the concept of space exploration, and I love some of the history of the space programs that we already have in real life here on Earth. But as I'm going through some of these images captured from the moon, looking back at our little sphere of oceans and land masses, just sitting there in empty space, there's just a sense of foreboding. I say all this to just contextualize what you guys are about to see as I dive into Starfield for the first time. I'm a big believer in immersion, and for me, it's very easy for me to get immersed in games. I'm quite excited to see what Bethesda has for us here in Starfield, and I'll be playing a character that is pretty close to myself, so I just wanted to give you guys a little introduction of how I'm going to view this world. There's going to be times where we're just going to cruise around and take in the sights, and yes, I imagine some of those sights are going to be quite unsettling. With all that being said, let's dive in and see what's out there.